Money is a very excellent servant, but a terrible master. The wealthiest man who ever lived is very specific about how much attention you need to pay on your financial state. Do you know your net wealth? Budgeting, when it comes to earning, helps you to understand your net wealth. Increased income doesn't always mean increased knowledge. A display of wealth means a display of luxury. And that is a trap that people can fall into. Only borrow if what you're buying helps to pay off the debt. And not everything is about keeping it away. Financial freedom encapsulates this ability to be flexible and agile to things that come along. If you know what your values are, if you know what your goals are, if you know what your time frames are, if you know what brings meaning to your life, you will understand how the money can help you to get there. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. You get so consumed by money that you will never be satisfied. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. For those of you who are coming for the second time, it's only been like what, 3-4 weeks? It's pretty quick, right? And straight away we're back here and excited to learn more. Well, I'm excited because I learned lots preparing for this. For those who, just to do a little bit of recap, if you haven't already subscribed to or had a look, you'll be able to see online that there's the community group on the NAS platform. And then there's also a Discord group that goes with it. In Discord, you get to ask questions, post your thoughts, comments, etc., and engage a little bit more. You would also notice that we are having from March to July every second Friday of the month, except this one. This is the first Friday. We will have one of the topics, and then we'll also go through some pre-reading and post-reading as well. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those things are there for you to have a look at online. And how you do it is you basically go to the NAS platform, and under products, inside this product, it's called Dollars and Cents, the title of our webinar, and there is lots of information in there. So the recording from the last seminar, if you weren't here last time, is in there. If you are looking for some PDFs, book recommendations, etc., they're all inside. So after today, the recording will be put up there. So it's essential that you log into the community and have a look. It's free, there's no charge, so you can access it as you wish. So for those people who like to plan ahead, here's the next few topics. Today is the one on the left, and then we'll go through 3 more after that. And then in August, we have a special series of special events for you. So if you are keen to put them into your diary, those are the dates for you. And they'll also be available online, as you're aware. And as you're aware, because it's very popular, so make sure you don't forget to register to reserve your seat, because we need to know how many chairs we need to count for next time round. All right, as starting off again, this is the usual disclaimer. Essentially, what I'm about to share with you is education. You can read all of it by yourself, but you need to figure out yourselves to talk to professionals about what you want to do with your money. Because money is a very excellent servant, but a terrible master. And that's where we're going to start our topic today, getting rich slowly or not getting poor quickly. How many of you want to get rich slowly? Okay, you're at the wrong seminar because that's the topic for tonight. Well, most people want to get rich quickly, yes? So if I made a seminar that said, get rich quickly, I would attract lots and lots of people. If you go online onto Instagram or you go online to Facebook, there is no one who's going to tell you to get rich slowly except me. I'm so sorry, you may have come to the wrong seminar. If you would like to leave, now's the time to leave. But the reason I'm going to talk about it is because many people hope to get rich quickly, but they never achieve. If you look at and talk to lots of people who've tried to get rich quickly, that's why there's a term, get rich quick scam, right? Because people often have this concept that immediacy is the only way to get rich. And what I want to present to you tonight is the principles, faith-based approach to understand the concepts around getting rich slowly and why that's important. And it comes from this: money is the excellent servant, but a terrible master. And I'm going to explain a little bit about that concept as we go. At every stage of life, everyone has needs and wants. Now they may differ. This is an example. I'm sorry the screen is a little bit small, but basically the orange colored dots are needs. So for example, things like a house, things like security, things like, it says here, borrowing, for example, wealth accumulation, and wants, those things in red, travel, charity, education, lifestyle, entertainment, hobbies. Different people have different needs and wants. And essentially, when you look at finance, based on our conversations in the last webinar, it's a balance between needs and wants. Remember the 7 mindsets that we talked about? You remember the 7 different approaches to wealth and the 7 things we talked about how you can move forward. I hope some of you did your homework because I'm going to ask you during the presentation. If you didn't, you're also welcome to leave. No, I'm just kidding. Tonight, I'm going to talk about this concept called FIRE. How many of you have heard about the concept of FIRE before? Okay, a few. I'm going to explain it in a very different context, not in the usual way it's explained. But I'm just going to start off by telling you that FIRE is not the fire that we play with or the fire that you use to cook. But this FIRE stands for financial independence or financially independent, retiring early. This is a concept that gained popularity in the late 1990s and has grown in popularity since as people started to explore this concept about getting rich quick. Most people ran into trouble or got frustrated because they looked at this chart and they realized that their needs and wants often outstrip what they could use from their income to supplement. Or their income was not enough to satisfy all their needs and wants. And so that's where this concept of FIRE came in. And it's grown as a movement over the last 20 to 30 years. And lots of people have invested huge amounts of time, so much so that there's even conferences around the world that you can go to attend to learn about this concept. Well, guess what? You're going to learn a little bit about it tonight. This is an example of someone who's done some calculations of how many years it takes to get to become financially independent. And it's based on how much you earn on the bottom, after-tax income, and on the left-hand side, spending. If you start looking, you'll get depressed. So just don't look too much at the diagram. But we'll talk a little bit about it later. Suffice to say that there's lots of information and ideas about financial independence out there. I'm going to put it to you tonight that FIRE is predominantly the concept that pushes back against getting rich quickly. Because to be financially independent and retire early, people often take years to get there. Unfortunately, most people want to get there instantaneously. If I told you you could have $10 million and retire tomorrow, who would not take that? Anyone? Okay, everyone wants to. Even if I told you you could have $5 million, maybe $2 million and retire tomorrow, would you take it? Oh, some, okay, well, maybe no.
Fine print.
Fine print, okay, so Helen's worried about fine print. Well, see, this is the concept. And so FIRE started to gain popularity because people were like, okay, this is an alternative to these get-rich-quick scams that keep coming around. And so I want to put it to you tonight that FIRE is not just a way of living, but it's actually a mindset. Remember we talked about mindsets last time around? And here's what I mean. Someone coined it this way. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see that it says, how to think like a FIRE investor. Now I'm just going to get rid of that mute button so that you can, yeah, there we go, so that you can actually see the screen. So it's not just a list of steps, but it's also how to think. And you've got here, plan ahead, avoid debt, reduce spending, earn as much as possible, invest as much as possible, invest appropriately, do it your own way. It sounds a bit familiar to what we talked about last time, remember? You had those things that I asked you at the end, the 7 steps to do. I hope you remember what they were. And on top of that, as this movement started to gain popularity, people started to explore different types of FIRE. So if you didn't know, there's lean FIRE, fat FIRE, coast FIRE, slow FIRE, I guess fast FIRE as well, barista FIRE. There's all sorts of FIRE. This is really cool. I had no idea what barista FIRE was. Anyone know what that is? These are people who believe in getting a side hustle, passive income from some other side hustle or hobby, i.e. being a barista, to supplement their income so that they can retire earlier. That's how they find financial independence. Sounds familiar, right? I remember some of us were chatting about it last time around. So there are different subcategories because people not only see this as a movement, but they see it as a way of getting out of their current state. Unfortunately, sometimes FIRE can look like this. And here's why. If you read some of the popular FIRE blogs out there, it's quite interesting. In fact, I find it quite enlightening because it encapsulates the way people think about their wealth. I read a blog, anonymous, but usually people write on these blogs or on Reddit anonymously, right? So people don't know who they are. And it's quite funny. This guy's name was the Cheap Firebug. And he basically said that in order to save money and retire early, he would buy a liter of milk and then add 500 mils of water to dilute the milk so the milk would last twice as long so that he didn't have to spend as much on milk. So when you look at it, it almost feels, when I was reading that, it feels like this guy was like running on a treadmill like this, because as much as we run on treadmills at work trying to chase our career dreams and goals, or maybe in our life we're running on a treadmill, FIRE can become a treadmill to some people as well. And so what I'm going to present to you tonight is not so much the concept of FIRE as such, but the mindset that goes behind the concept of financial freedom. So tonight is going to be the first part, and I don't have enough time to go through the entirety, so the next webinar will be the second part of that. In essence, you can break this concept down into this screen. So if you take nothing else away from tonight, this is the picture that you should encapsulate. What I've circled in yellow is what we will cover today, and then I'll talk about the other two buckets in the future webinars that come along. Okay? In other words, what you put into the buckets, your income, whether that's passive income, active income from your job, from your side hustle, from your investments, whatever it may be, then goes into these other buckets. And today we're going to talk about income, spending, and saving. Income, spending, and saving. Another way of putting it is what you earn, what you spend, and what you save. Yeah? Very simple. And you're like, Daryl, why are you talking about things that even primary school kids understand, right? You know, primary school kid, how much you earn? You get pocket money from your parents. How much you save? How much you put in the piggy bank? How much you spend? What lollies you buy at the shop? You learn these things as basic primary school kids. So why is someone standing up here talking about this? I hope as we go through, it'll help you to understand a little bit more about this concept. And whatever you take from today is going to be built on the next time round, okay? So the more you put in and get out of today's presentation, the more next webinar will make sense, next seminar will make sense. Last time round, we talked a little bit about King Solomon, the king, the wisest man on earth, the richest man on earth. Here's one of his quotes. Know well the conditions of your flocks and give attention to your herds, for riches do not last forever, and does a crown endure to all generations. It's really interesting that one of the things that I would not expect a rich person to know about is the exact amount of money they have. If you remember what his net total worth was? $2 trillion. If I had that amount of money, does it really matter whether it's 1.9 or 2.1 trillion? Does Elon Musk really care about whether he has 251 billion or 249 billion? I don't really think so. I don't know. Maybe he does. But it's really interesting that the wealthiest man who ever lived is very specific about how much attention you need to pay on your financial state. In today's language, we call this your net worth. I don't really like that word because it makes people feel somewhat insignificant if your net worth is lower. So I'm going to call it your net wealth. And here's the question I want to ask you. Do you individually know your net wealth? Or if you have a partner and together, do you know your combined net wealth? Your net wealth or your net worth is essentially your assets minus your liabilities. Very straightforward, okay? For those of you who like math equations, here we go. Net worth equals assets minus liabilities. Now, some of you are like, what does this mean? Okay, so I put it in smaller text underneath. How much your assets are, your house, your car, your income, your savings, your investments, all the things that you own. So if you want to think of it another way, it's like all the things that earn you money, yeah? Or have a store of value. Some people put in their musical instruments, Lego, art collections, assets, boats, all sorts of things, assets, right? Your liabilities, your debt, your mortgage, your HECS, debts in Australia, other loans that you may have, the spending that you do on a regular basis. So essentially, your net wealth is your assets minus your liabilities. So earning, spending, saving. This is the adult version of it. Now, if you look at this, and you go and look at popular financial discussions these days, many financial advisors will actually tell you that it's really important to know your net wealth. Because the basis of that will allow you to then predict and project and work towards your financial goals and timeframes. Remember that from last time? And so you can see here the example article. Compiling a net wealth statement might seem like a tedious task, but it's also the best ways to get a clear snapshot of your financial health. And in this article, this lady goes over this. So you can see here, this is a hypothetical net worth statement for a couple. They have cash at the top, they have their investments, they have their property, their retirement, their superannuation, their liabilities, etc., etc. Now you know why for the pre-reading for this, we asked you to check your super balance. Did anyone check their super balance? Oh, some people are paying attention. You don't have to tell me, okay? You just need to know. You just need to know. And the good thing is, back in the 1990s, you had to do this on paper, right? You had to write it out and use a calculator, and then you change, and then you got to rewrite it out. Today, you don't even need to do anything, because why? There's so many people that have created Excel sheets, Google Drive calculations, calculators, and we sent out some of those this week. We'll send it out again after the webinar for you to do it, and all you need to do is plug the numbers into the sheet. The calculator, sorry. And it will spit this out for you. In fact, many banking apps try to help you already. They give you like a summary statement with colorful pictures to tell you this is how much you've spent this month, this is how much you owe, this, etc., etc. Your net wealth statement is perhaps the most important thing that you can do between now and the next webinar. But it's also going to help you for the future. Because once you have that as a base, you just have to adjust it. If your super goes up, you just adjust the number in the box. And why that's important is because it sets the foundation of how you are able to approach your goals and timelines. Now you know why King Solomon says, know exactly how much you have. In those days, it was how many sheep and flocks and herds, right? And that's tedious, right? One sheep dies, and that one sheep gives birth, and then the how many chickens do you have? The chicken changes one ate by a fox, one laid an egg and had two other chicks. And so you can understand that even a rich man wants to know exactly how much they have because they are able to then project and predict. So this might sound like really simple advice, but I hope it resonates because it's going to help you significantly. Let me give you some understandings. This was just in the news recently. Last year, McCrindle published this kind of picture. This is a graphical format. For those of you who like pictures, this is the graphical format. So most of us would be in Gen Y or Gen X, somewhere between 25 and 44. And so you can see that that's the average, the percentage of population. If you're older, it's also okay. It's not a problem because your net wealth increases. So you can see that over time. So this is average Australia, right? So the average Australian, for those of you at the back, I'll read it out for you. So if you're in Gen Y, 25 to 34, the average household net wealth is about 353,000. If you're in 35 to 44, it's about 690, so 700K. And you can see here the bottom, average annual household income, bottom is 128K, 147 here. Now this is a graphical format. For those of you who like graphics, here it is. For those of you who like numbers, well, here you go. Here's more numbers for you. This was just this week in the Financial Review. They did an article on the top 1% in Australia. So don't get freaked out, okay? This is just, I'm gonna give you some numbers just to give you a comparison. So when you go home and do your net wealth statement, you'll be able to compare it to kind of average Australia. In Australia, the blue is individual, single. The orange is household, assuming partner, spouse, with plus or minus kids. Or kids are not factored into this calculation. The median income for Australians is 55,000 before tax. That's because some people work part-time. But the average income, if you average it out, is 76,000 a year. Okay, so this just give you a comparison. Again, please don't tell me your numbers. I'm not asking you to reveal your secret personal wealth information. The top 20% of Australians, 100K plus, 105K plus. Top 10% of Australians, 145K plus. Top 5%, 189. And if you're in the top 1% of Australians, you earn 375K before tax. This will give you some indication. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. Super balances. So I assume for the assumption's sake, everyone is in the blue dot. That's why I only took a snapshot. The blue dot is 25 to 40 years old. If you're above 40, it's okay. You're still young enough to be considered in that blue dot. So on the bottom, the colors at the top just give you the average and median. The number values at the bottom. So just to give you an example, the average super balance for someone aged between 25 and 40 is 50K, 0.05. This is Australia, yep. If you are in the top 25% of Australians, that's 60K. If you're in the top 1%, you have almost 290,000 in your superannuation account. That's somewhere between the age of 25 to 40. Now that obviously increases by household. So this gives you an indication that everyone actually, even in the financial sector, wants you to calculate your net wealth so you understand your position. Not so that you can rank. I'm in the bottom of the Australian. So, not so you can feel sorry for yourself, but so you get an understanding and appreciation of where you need to be heading, especially if you're not quite there. Now this will differ. For those of you who only migrated to Australia recently, maybe your super is not as high, right? If you started working in Australia when you were 14 years old in McDonald's all the way until now, your super balance may be higher. So there's some caveats to that. That's why there's a median and an average, but you get the idea. Here's the other interesting one. This is the top 1%, okay? Again, don't get freaked out, but you look at the bottom one, the top net wealth of Australian households by age. Again, 25 to 40. So for those of you who are married, if you're the average, it's about 450,000 net wealth. Net wealth usually includes property if you own that property. In Australia, that's a challenging thing at the moment, especially in Melbourne or Sydney where property prices are high. But you get an idea of that. And net wealth assumes that you own you can only count the part of the property that you own. If you have a mortgage, you don't own the entirety, you can't put that number in. So that's just to give you some indications, right? From comparison. Does it make sense so far? So essentially, what I'm trying to say is, how much do you earn versus how much do you spend? Okay? That builds into your net wealth statement. That helps you to be able to understand your position. The average Australian earns 75K per annum. The median is 55. We saw that on the previous screen. The average Australian spends $1,800 per month on living expenses. This is groceries, food, petrol, shopping, utilities, entertainment, fitness, excluding rent and mortgage. So that number is actually much higher depending on whether you rent or you pay a mortgage. So it gives you an idea of how you are able to get to that net wealth statement. So I'm just giving you concepts here, right? And so again, earning, spending, saving. Just three things. This is what breaking that FIRE concept down, this is how it's broken down. And let me keep going a little bit further so you see some of the detail around that fleshed out a bit more. How many of you have done a budget before? Please, everyone raise your hand. If you haven't done a budget before, you will do a budget before the next webinar, okay? Because you get resources on how to do one. And why I'm saying that is budgets directly go to the concept of earning. When you earn, when you're able to bring in an income, having a budget allows you to then chart the rest of your spending and saving. Remember that initial diagram? Income into the bucket, spending and saving. Here are just some examples of budgets. I'm not going to go through each one. This is not a budgeting seminar. If you need help with budgeting, speak to some people, your friends in the audience who have done one before, or speak to a financial advisor who can help you to do these things. The great thing about budgeting is that there are lots of tools that are free that allow you to do this all the time. I'm just going to give you an example. A very popular one is this concept of buckets. There are different buckets that you park your money in. There's a savings bucket, there is a spending bucket, there is a luxury bucket, etc., etc. That's an example of budgeting. Many people use the 50-30-20 model. The 50-30-20 model is essentially 50% of your, if you earn $1,000, $500, 50% goes to your needs, 20% goes to savings, and 30% goes to things that are discretionary, things that you can splurge on, if I can call it that. Maybe a travel, maybe some concert tickets, maybe some holiday, whatever it may be. So that's an easy way of proportion. Now, not everyone's brain thinks like that, so that's why there are so many different ways. But what I want to emphasize is that budgeting, when it comes to earning, helps you to understand your net wealth. Okay? So even if it's not going to prompt you to be better with your money, it's going to help you to understand your money better. So if you don't like budgeting, please do it. Number 2, spending. So we talked about earning, now we're going to talk about spending. I'm just going to put 4 key things up here on the screen so that you understand a little bit more around some of the traps that people can fall into. These are 4 traps that wealthy people generally don't fall for because there are people looking out for them or helping them not to get into this trap, although that's not always 100% true. Now, remember last time we talked about mindsets. This is basically the reflection of the mindsets concept that we talked about. The first one is the concept of lifestyle inflation. spending increases in line with your income. The more you earn, the more you want to spend. The more you earn, the more your spending goes up. And once that income drops off, the spending usually doesn't drop off at the same time. And so this is one of the concepts. It's called lifestyle inflation. Other people call it spending creep. This is one of the concepts that's really important not to fall into when you're thinking about spending. Number 2, financial literacy. Increased income doesn't always mean increased knowledge. Just because you earn more money doesn't mean you understand how to manage your money better. So that's a really important thing, this especially when it comes to spending. Third one, investment versus consumption. People often have difficulty balancing long-term savings for short-term needs and wants. If you get $1,000 today, I'd rather spend it now than save it for later. And I'm going to talk about saving in a second in a few slides' time to explain what that concept looks like. Number 4, luxury and status. Mistaking luxury for wealth. A display of wealth means a display of luxury, and that's not always going, that is a trap that people can fall into. So from earning, it's budgeting. From a spending perspective, just understanding the trends. Now, spending often in Australia in particular, I'm not sure why exactly, we touched on some of the points last time, but the concept of debt is a big part of spending. In Australia, most people have some form of debt. It's not always the case in other countries, civilizations, in other societies as well. And that's mainly because people take a lot of debt here for 2 things. That's education and also for housing. That's a big feature of the way we live in Australia. Now, debt is a very complex topic that we can talk about at length in its own presentation, its own seminar. But I'm just going to put up 2 really simple rules about debt. And that's these 2 things. Number 1, never borrow money for something that decreases in value. So number 1 rule about debt when it comes to spending, don't borrow money for something that decreases in value. Let me give you an example of that. A car. As soon as a car is driven out of the showroom, the car's value decreases. So if you take a loan or have debt to borrow something on something like a car that decreases, what that means is that you continually chase your tail because the value of the asset decreases. Rule number 2, only borrow if what you're buying helps to pay off the debt. The most classic example of this is education. People sometimes borrow so that they can study to get a higher degree, so they can get a promotion in their job or get a better job. Does that make sense? What they're buying, a degree, helps them to pay off their debt because they can earn more by having that degree. If you stick to these 2 general principles about debt, you'll be smart about it. Again, if you want to talk more about that, feel free to engage in our community or we can have a chat offline. But these are 2 really simple principles about debt. In fact, Solomon, going back to our wise man friend, talks a lot about debt. And this is one of his statements. It says, the rich rules over the poor and the borrower is the slave of the lender. Be not one of those who gives pledges, i.e. takes out debt, who has become surety for debts. One of the key principles that Solomon did when he built his wealth is not to go into debt where possible. It's not just Solomon. There are many people. Mark Cuban, businessman from the US, pay off your debt first. Freedom from debt is worth more than any amount you can earn. Warren Buffett said it a different way. Don't buy things you can't afford with money you don't have to impress people you don't like. Never risk what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need. Different ways of expressing the same thing. Debt is not your friend in general, especially when debt causes the things you go into debt for depreciate in value. So we have earning and budgets, we have spending, and now we have saving. I'm just going to put up this concept of compounding up here and just try and work my way through to explain it for you. Sorry, the screen is a little on the small side, but this is the graphical explanation. This is the numbers explanation. For those of you who like pictures, look on the left. For those of you who like numbers, look on the right. I like numbers, so I'll start on the right, but I'll move to the left in a second. This basically gives you a value of what happens for person 1 and person 2. Person 1 invested $5,000 every year from the age of 15 to 24, so 10 years in a row, and then stopped investing from 25 until they were 60 and retired. Because of the principle of compounding, this person ended up with $2.8 million compounded. This calculation is based on a 10% increase every year, assuming you get 10%. Person 2 started at 25 and invested $5,000 every year from 25 all the way to 60, and they ended up with $1.6 million. So there's a gap of 1.1 million between the two. This graph on the left explains the same thing. Person 1 started at 25, set aside $5,000 a year for 10 years in a row, assuming there's an 8% increase. Investor 2 starts at 35, invest $5,000 for 30 years in a row until they get to 65. And you can see the discrepancy there. This is the concept of compounding. In other words, the amount that you earn if reinvested in whatever you invest in, whatever you save in, and continuing to grow, the earlier you do it, the better it is. The longer you keep it in there for, the better it is. That's what compounding means, right? And most of you will understand what I'm talking about when it comes to compounding. If you can leave your principal and the interest that you get from a high savings account in a bank, that compounding builds. If you read Solomon's descriptions of his wealth, there's compounding everywhere. The concept of compounding is the concept that underpins this idea of getting rich slowly. How many years does it take to get here? At least 10, right? How many years did it take this person? A lot longer, because they started later and they didn't do it at the front. So getting rich slowly is because you start here and then you end up rich here. You don't start here and end up less rich here. Now, most of us when I read this, I'm like, oh, I'm really sad. I'm already somewhere around here, right? Like, I mean, none of us are here yet, I hope. But all of us are somewhere around here. And that's another reason why people get so fixated on this, which I'll talk about in a second, is because when they see themselves here and having this kind of blank all the way down to when they're 35 and they start panicking because they're like, what am I going to do to get here? So I need to find something that gets me rich quickly because my friend, like Catherine, who started here, is going to be there and she can stop. And so people get into this cycle, and they get worried and more worried because they are starting late. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. At least it's better to start today than not start at all. Because if you don't start at all, you will end up down here and worried. And then what happens is that people start pushing back their retirement because they can't meet their spending needs. Does that make sense? So earning, spending, saving. So what's the problem with FIRE? And here's the challenge. When you get into this movement, often what happens is that the focus becomes on money, right? So, for those of you who are numbers oriented, you take a picture of this and then you stick it on your wall and you're like, every day I'm going to have to meet this goal so that in 10 years I can stop. And what happens is that you get sucked in because people get fixated on trying to be financially independent, i.e. I can get into that diagram and then I can retire. And that's all they fixate upon. So what then ends up happening is it starts pushing you to maximize your earnings right now. So I'm going to work as hard as I can today, and I'm going to slave over everything that I want, and I'm going to do overtime shifts, and I'm going to do double pay, and I'm going to do everything because when I can maximize that money, then I can retire early. So what it actually advocates for is this concept of scarcity, which is what I was talking about before. If I dilute the milk by half, then I'll be able to scrounge and save so that I can maximize that $5,000. So you get into this vicious cycle. And now you can understand why I say sometimes FIRE can feel like running on that FIRE treadmill. You just go round and round and round. It's a very different concept to understanding that financial freedom is slightly different from financial independence. Financial freedom means you don't just focus on money. You don't necessarily have a scarcity mindset. You're not just centered on self-fulfillment. Oh, I've got the $5,000 today, I'm done. I can now do whatever I want. You actually have some enjoyment and some fun and some meaning about your life because not everything is about saving money, not everything is about making as much money, not everything is about keeping it away. I, in fact, find some people who talk about FIRE more disgruntled with life than people who are spending. You don't want to be on both extremes, right? The other challenge with FIRE is also that there's no buffer or rainy day backup. And I'm going to talk about that next webinar. So just pause that thought a little bit. Many people think of life like this. Start when you're born, get your education, then you finish your uni, then you work for this whole long time, and then you retire at 65, some magic number. And then you enjoy life for 14 years, and then you die. Such a morbid graph, right? That's why it's black and white. And this is how people sometimes view financial independence, right? So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to maximize my education, then I'm going to work as hard as I can so I can move this dial as far back along here as possible so I retire early. And then when I retire early, I can maximize my enjoyment until I die. And so you still die, yes, that's right. But unfortunately, the push to move this dial up makes this a very two-dimensional black and white concept that has no meaning or purpose. And what it also indicates is that things have to be sequential, i.e., I need to work as hard as I can so that once I finish that, I can then retire. And enjoyment can only come after I've worked as hard as I can. And so that's one of the challenges that you find with this whole concept of pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's why we come back to that same principle we started off last time with, which is if you have the right mindset when it comes to wealth, this is actually a different type of diagram. And I'm going to give you two examples, okay? One example for people who understand baseball and sport a bit more, and another example for people who are not sports fans, just to give you an idea of what this could actually look like. What my concept of FIRE is, not the traditional explanation. For those of you who have played baseball before, I'm not a big baseball fan, but I think this is the easiest way to explain it. Sorry, the diagram didn't come up properly, but this is like a baseball field. So for those of you who don't play baseball, you have a home base, right, where you start. You hit the ball, and the aim is to run around in a quadrangle, in a square, to base 1, and then base 2, and then base 3, and then back to home base for a home run. So this is the kind of explanation of how I put it. So I've called it the 4 bases of financial freedom. Many of us start here, somewhere here, we hit the ball, and then we start running. So the first phase of life is often saving. But unlike this diagram that I showed you previously, you can actually run back and forth. And sometimes you go from one phase, one base to another before you move forward. The long-term goal is you get to a place where you can live and grow and thrive. And sometimes you can run this way as well. Now, that's why I called it modified baseball. In baseball, you only run one way. You only run one way, correct. But that's why it's modified. But you get this concept because generally speaking, people move in this direction. And here's the reason why. When you're starting off in life, you tend to save your money, right? You're earning a small amount, you're saving, and then you're building up. Then you start to scale or to amplify. You get a better paying job. You get married, so you can pool your household income together. As you get into your 30s and 40s, as you get more experience, you get promoted, you start your own business, things start to build up. You start to amplify. Then you have kids, and then your money disappears. And then when you get older, you start to protect your assets, right? You have a big house, you have a car, you have some savings, you have some investments. And so what that allows you to do is to continue to go between these bases as you see fit. And so some of us right at the moment may be saving and we enjoy. Doesn't mean you can't do both. Also, we're very conscious that sometimes in life, things don't go according to plan. So you might have this financial independence on the previous screen. At 45, I can retire. And then at 45, someone in your family gets cancer. They lose their job. You pause your work. You have to look after them. You become the full-time carer. And then your savings disappear overnight. You've seen some people who, in my line of work, I see this happen quite often. We often have kids that don't have any more treatment options in Australia. So their parents take time off work, fly them to the United States to find some genetic treatment for their very rare condition. Costs them $100,000 for the medication, not the uprooting. And so you may be in a period where everything's going really nicely, and then all of a sudden life throws you a curveball, baseball. And then you go back from amplification, maybe back to saving. Or you were protecting, and then the cyclone Alfred came into Brisbane and then knocked over your investment properties, and 2 of your properties are gone. So then you go backwards. And sometimes in life, that's okay, because this is a mindset. This is not a sequential thing. If you were stuck on this, you'd be like, here, crisis, that's it. What do you do now? Then it's back to this linear graph. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So financial freedom is different from financial independence in my mind, because freedom encapsulates this ability to be flexible and agile to things that come along. And if your mindset is set in that direction, it doesn't restrict you to this. Now, for those of you who don't like baseball, try to illustrate it this way. When I was giving my presentation to my residents, they understood Taylor Swift a bit more. I don't know, I don't follow Taylor Swift, but I just used the example to explain it. Because this helps to capture the same thing. In your 20s, I called it the 4 eras, because really there's an era of living and growing. There's a concept around saving, which we talked about before. Building your budgets, focusing on your cash flow. There's an amplification, and this is usually the time period that it happens, reducing your debt, protecting income, accumulating, maximizing your super, staying the course. When you're getting into your older stage of life, you're protecting your assets, your legacy, your contribution, your retirement. And sometimes you can go between these. These are just general kind of time frames of your life, eras of your life. Same concept. And so the question I want to leave you tonight with is, what actually is the type of fire that you want? Because fire means different things to different people. For some people, it's literally running on that treadmill, just on a treadmill, going round. For some other people, it's like a mantra. They have a goal, like I need to rush to that $5,000 or that $20,000, or I need to retire by 40. That's it, bang. If I don't retire by 40, I failed. And so if I get that 40.2, too late. For other people, it's actually understanding that it's approach to life. And this book, I'm not promoting this book specifically, but it's one of the examples that has started to talk about this concept of financial freedom with a bit more of a mindset and values proposition. If you know what your values are, if you know what your goals are, if you know what your time frames are, if you know what your meaning, what brings meaning to your life, you will understand how the money can help you to get there. That's why it's called Your Money or Your Life. 9 steps to transforming your relationship with money and achieving financial independence. This is exactly talking about the types of things we've been talking about today. I'm going to leave you with a finishing quote from King Solomon before I leave some thought questions and time for discussion. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is one of the challenges of traditional fire. You get so consumed by money that you will never be satisfied. Even if you retire at 42, will you be satisfied? Maybe not. But if you adopt this mindset, going back to this picture for a second, of understanding that the home base is living and growing, living, thriving, growing with purpose and meaning, it means a whole different paradigm. Financial independence is not necessarily the same as financial freedom. When you calculate your net worth, when you understand earning, spending, saving, next time round, we're going to go into a little bit more detail. You can apply those things, and the reason I've broken it up into 2 segments to give you a bit of time to process and think about it, finish the calculator, is that next time round, we're actually going to bring those numbers and make them come to life. If you don't have the numbers, it makes it actually really difficult to understand the concepts. So if I can encourage you again, please go and fill those things out, because it will be very beneficial for the next time round. I'm going to leave you with these thought questions today. The first one is, are you buying consumables, buying consumables that decrease in value or assets that increase in value in your everyday spending? Number 2, are you spending everything you make every month, or are you saving or investing? Number 3, do you have debt that cancels out your assets on your balance sheet or on your net wealth statement? Number 4, do you owe more than you own? And number 5, what does fire look like to you? Only you can answer these questions. Maybe someone can help you to answer 1 to 4, but really, number 5, only you can answer. Next time round, when we come back, we're going to talk about this balance between spending now and saving later, and you're going to elaborate a little bit more on what the concept of financial freedom could look like. That's on May the 9th. So I'm going to finish there and allow you guys to ask any questions that you want, and then we will continue our discussion later on. Thank you.